Well, good evening, everyone. Hi, how you doing? I hope everyone's doing well. Welcome to the Friday night photo mentor question and answer session. This is where I get the opportunity to answer your questions about all things photography related. And I want to thank you for joining me. I know you guys have a lot of other stuff to do. You don't need to be here, but I appreciate you hanging out with me. And hopefully we got some good questions tonight. Again, I do this every Friday night, and I like to explain to people why I do this, because if you're new here, one of the reasons is that I find there's a lot of misinformation that's spread on groups and forums and things like that. And so it's very frustrating, quite honestly. And so this is my attempt to try and clear that up, give you some accurate information, the best of my knowledge, at least. I don't know everything. I've been doing this a long time, but it doesn't mean I know everything. So if you have a better answer or better information, please pass it along. And if you, I also recommend people test things. Don't just take my word for it. Look at what I tell you, and it works for me. I've tried it. All the things I recommend are things I have experience with. And so, but you should take everything people tell you with a grain of salt and make sure that you know that it's going to work for you, because we're really solving a problem. And if you don't have enough information about the problem you're solving, then it may not be the right answer. Another one says, hey, I'm trying to buy a new camera. What should I buy? Well, that's a pretty broad question. And without knowing budget and a bunch of other things, you may give the wrong answer. So anyway, test everything everybody says, test everything I say. But I think you'll find that the information I give you is straightforward, honest, and will be very helpful to you. Let's see, what else? Let's see here. I guess that's pretty much it. We have some questions that have already come in. If you, again, if you want to leave a question, you can find us, by the way, on going to facebook.photomentor.tv. Although if you're watching this now on Facebook or YouTube, you probably already know where we are. Or this stream is also on Facebook at YouTube at youtube.photomentortv, and that'll take you directly to the channel as well. If you want to leave a question, please put a capital Q in front of the question with a colon, and then post your question either in the comments on the Facebook page or in the comments of the YouTube channel, and I should be able to get it. I don't know why I have trouble with this so often. It kind of seems like it goes back and forth, but now I have the questions coming in from the YouTube channel, but I'm not able to display the ones from the Facebook on the screen for some reason, and I don't know what's going on. I have to figure that out. I apologize. So you'd think after doing this, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I'd kind of have this down, but if you saw the behind the scenes stuff here, you can see that there's a lot going on and it can be pretty complicated. And so you can see why maybe not everything works perfectly every time. So anyway, all right. So let's start with one of the questions we have here tonight. And the first one is from, I guess it's Isla. And Isla says, I just bought a used Nikon D50. I'm just learning. It came with 2 lenses, a Sigma 55 to 200 and a Nikon 18 to 55. I'm told these lenses don't do the best in small rooms. I want to be able to photograph my newborn when he arrives next month. Well, first of all, Isla, congratulations on your son. That's wonderful. It's just a terrific thing, and I applaud you, and I just congratulate you, and I hope that your son turns out to be everything you hope him to be. I'm sure he will. As far as photography side, the advice you were given is a little hard to narrow down. So when people say that they say that it may not be best in a small room, what I don't know is if they're referring to the amount of light required in a small room, or if they're talking about the focal length, meaning the length of the lens, the zoom part of the lens. So an 18 to 55 is really about a 24 to 70 on a DX lens, on a D50. And those lenses will be, that 18-55 would be fine in just about any situation. And now if it's super small, of course. But, you know, if you're photographing a newborn, you really aren't photographing the whole room anyway. You kind of want to get close, or at least get zoom in and get a tight shot of the child, and you know, see the features of the baby and how cute they are and everything, right? So you'll probably end up using the 18-55 in that scenario. Now the 55-200 would be probably too long for a small room, and that would be something you would typically use outdoors. But the 18-55 should be fine. It's what we call a kit lens. It's a universal lens. It comes with just about every camera that is a crop sensor. If you don't know what that is, we can just let me know. Again, I will tell you, you can also, if you don't get your question answered tonight, you can always send an email to help@photomentor.tv, and I will do my best to answer that question for you that way. So anyway, so to answer a question, that 18-55 would be fine for what you're trying to do, and no problems there. You might later on want to look at a different lens. And I'm going to talk about these lenses in a second, because somebody asked another question about them, and so I'll hold off on that. But the 18-55 should be fine for what you're trying to do, no problem. Okay, so let's see. The next question is, I just upgraded to a D750, 7500. That's a Nikon, of course, if you're not familiar with that. Is there an option for a remote with a shutter release and a timer? So the Nikon, that series of camera, and many of the cameras below that, all use what's called an MC-DC2 remote, and it has like a little connector on the side. It'll go on the left-hand side of the camera. Looks sort of like a USB, but it's not. It's much smaller. It's a different connector, and I'll show you what one looks like here. I think I have one here somewhere. Yeah, here we go. So that looks sort of like that. And so there, I don't know if you can see the connector here on the left-hand side, what it looks like. But the question was, do they make one with a timer for doing time lapse? I don't believe Nikon makes one. Nikon makes a DC2 remote, but it's just an on and off switch, which is fine for most things. But this is, so you'd have to go to a third party company. This one's made by Newer, but there's a bunch of other companies that make them out there. So anything with an MC-DC2 interface or connector will work with your camera. I should also mention that why would you use a remote like that? And even with the timer or without the timer, even the standard DC2 remote. And the reason is because you don't want to touch the camera. If you're doing a long exposure, let's say of astrophotography or something like that, you open the shutter, you leave the shutter open a long time, then you close the shutter, and any movement of the camera will cause blur. So you don't want to actually touch the camera to open the lens. So you would use a remote like this, or again, one without a timer built into it, to trigger the camera remotely. That will open the lens, leave it open for X amount of time, and then close the shutter. I should also mention that there's a way around that if you don't have one of these handy, and I say this all the time, photography is all about solving problems. And so that's our job, is to think on our feet, figure out ways to do things if I don't have all the tools and money and time. And another way to do this would be using the timer function. So you can go to the timer function on your camera, go to bulb mode, or let's say you're going to open it for 3 minutes or whatever the length of time you have the shutter set for. Put it on timer mode, hit the button. I think it takes about 10 seconds. It'll start beeping, and then it'll open the camera up, and it'll be on until you turn it off. But if you're in the bulb mode, you still have to touch the camera to stop it. That's where a remote would make sense. So hopefully that helps. I don't know if it will or not, but hopefully it gives you an example of why you would want to have a remote. Okay, let's see what else we got tonight. Okay. Now this was an interesting question because it kind of threw me, actually. I got it wrong. I mean, the question was, does Nikon make a 50 millimeter DX lens, a crop sensor lens? And honestly, I thought they did. I'm a Nikon shooter. I've been around Nikon a long time. I thought they did, but apparently they don't from the research that I've done on this. And so it doesn't really matter, but I'll just kind of show you how it works. And that is that, so they make two lenses. Let's see here. How do I do? Okay, so they make two lenses that a lot of people will tend to go to, and I'm going to go into more explanation here about this. But they make two lenses, a 35 millimeter f1.8 and a 50 millimeter f1.8. Now, again, I thought that they made a 50 that was also a DX lens, but apparently they don't. So the lenses are marked clearly. You can see this 35 millimeter says DX right on the lens. The FX does not say anything. Now, here's the point. A lot of people will tell you you have to use, they say, oh, if you want a 50 millimeter lens, then you really should be using a 35 millimeter lens, because 35 times 1.5 gives you, what, 70 millimeter or more focal length lens. But that's not exactly accurate. So I'm not trying to be precise here or, pick on things, but it's not the same thing. In other words, and I need to do a slide on this to show you guys, but I think I talked about it last week, actually. So a 35 millimeter lens on a crop sensor is not a 50 millimeter. It's not the same as a 50 millimeter. It doesn't give you the same look as a 50 millimeter. What it does, though, is it crops the field of view. So you see what a 50 millimeter would look this way. So it's kind of like, the difference between not having anything and then having blinders on. You're not magnified. I'm not seeing any further when I do this. All I'm doing is seeing less on the sides. And that's essentially what happens when you could put a 35 millimeter or a 50 millimeter on a DX lens. So a lot of people say, oh, you need to go 35 millimeter. Now, the problem with that is this right here. And that is that, hopefully you can see this, but this is a photo that was done by Julia Trotti. And Julia did a photo here with a 24, a 35, a 50, an 85, and a 135. So if you look, what she did is she did a great thing by making sure she was the same distance away from the subject. But if you look at the background and the way things change, if you look at the 24 millimeter, you can see the branches are way back here in the back, and there's not much compression, in other words. So, but if you look over here at the 50 or the 85 millimeter, look how close the branches are over the young lady's, her right shoulder, our left shoulder on this side. So the look is very different. And if you look at it on a portrait, for example, it's even more pronounced. So here's a 35 millimeter in the middle, but if you look down here at the bottom, you can see there's on the right is a 70 millimeter, an 85, 100, and a 135. So this is actually a real focal length change, not just a crop sensor change. My point is that the characteristics of the lens is very different when you are going with a longer lens. Most of the time, when you're photographing people, you want to use a slightly longer lens. My lens on a full frame camera is an 85 millimeter. It's my favorite lens. And it's because I can get that compression that I want, the look of the facial features. It doesn't exaggerate them. And I can get a nice soft background if that's what I'm looking for. So I would say if you're photographing people, still go with a real 50 millimeter lens, even though it's going to give you a narrower field of view. And the reason, again, is because it's going to be more flattering. That if you look between the 35 and the 70, you can see the difference between how it sort of distorts. The 50 will distort a little bit, but it's not quite as bad, but it does have a little of that different look to it. And so that's why I recommend that you stick with a 50 millimeter lens not a 35 millimeter lens. And again, you can see the difference a little bit here as well. It's not as exaggerated, but this shows you the characteristics of the lens. So anyway, it's kind of a long way around of answering Melissa's question about a 50 millimeter lens for a DX camera, but I felt it was important enough to explain the difference because I see this repeated over and over. Oh, you need to get a 35 millimeter, and a 35 millimeter is not the same as a 50 millimeter. The field of view is the same, but not the focal length, not the way that the camera, not the way that the lens optically works. So anyway, all right, let's see what else we got here. Okay, so, here, I already answered this question. I didn't realize. So the question is, what's your favorite Nikon lens for portrait shots? Again, the longer the lens, the better in most cases. Not always, but in most cases. So I like an 85. When I was shooting film many, many years ago, my favorite was a 135. I don't know why they changed. 135 doesn't seem to be as popular for digital cameras for some reason. But they do make them. I believe Sigma makes a really nice 135. I want to say it's a 1.8, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, that's for Nikon or Canon or whatever. But the reason I like a longer lens is, again, it compresses the facial features. It's much more flattering. Now, let's say, for example, you don't have a portrait lens, quote unquote, a portrait lens, a prime lens, a lens with non-zoom features. And you only have, as we said earlier, the young lady had an 18-55 and a 55-200. One of the things you can do is don't get close and zoom out. Don't take your 18-55 and get close to the person and zoom in. Back up and zoom in. I should say, don't get close and zoom out. Back up and zoom in. In fact, even the 55-200 would probably be a better lens. And the reason for that is if you back up and zoom in, then you're going to find you're going to get, again, more compression, which is going to be more flattering, but you'll also get a shallower depth of field. So everybody says, oh, get a 55 or 50 or 35 millimeter f1.8 because it blurs out the background. And that is true. But you can get that same effect even if your lens is only a 3.5 or 5.6 by backing up and zooming in. You'll still get a shallower depth of field. Also, keep in mind the depth of field is based on distance, not just aperture. So a lot of people say, "Wow, I'm shooting at 3.5, and I'm still I got the eye in focus or the nose in focus and the eye isn't, or something like that." The reason is when you get really close, then the depth of field gets really, really narrow. So anyway, so I won't go into all this. That gets real complicated. But the point is, the distance also has an effect, not just aperture, not just that you have shooting with a 1.8. It's also how close you are. So anyway, I hope that helps a little bit. Let's see here. So I tell you what, before we get to that, let's want to do a kind of a review of some images that I wanted to talk about. This is one that I wanted to mention. This is a photo that was done by Anthony Copeland, and I believe Anthony's in the UK. I'm not positive. And Anthony shot this. No, he can't be because he said it was. Well, I don't know. He said it was in Arizona, so I think it's probably not in the UK. I'm thinking of. Anyway, so the point is, this was done by Anthony Copeland, shot with a Sony NEX6, which is not a super new camera, nothing fancy. I would call it somewhat of an entry-level camera. It's small, it's mirrorless. And the kit lens, a 16-50 lens, which I don't believe, I'm not a Sony shooter, but I don't believe it's considered, the best lens they make. But if you look at this photo he did, it's just, he really did an outstanding job of catching this lightning. This was in Arizona, and he was saying that they didn't have many lightning storms or thunderstorms in a while, and so he was lucky to catch this one. This one, I believe, had a 10-second exposure on it. So, and I asked him about it. I said, was the color of the lightning, which I think really accentuates the picture, based on the color temperature or the setting of the camera versus was it done in Photoshop or post processing. He says no, it's done in white balance. So basically the white balance of the camera was set to such a way it turned that really purple. Just a beautiful image. It's really nice. I don't know that you could have done anything better with it. Something I'll point out is that look how the horizon line is into the image. In other words, there's much more sky than there is foreground. Why? Because the sky is the hero. That the sky is the most important part of the shot, and that's why you want to have that the horizon line at the lower third, so that you draw the attention to the most important part of the image, which is the sky. And so that is the deal on that. That's why. And so that's just a beautiful picture that Anthony did, and I want to thank him for letting us use that, because I think it's a great learning tool and an example of a great picture that he came up with. All right, so the next one is a picture that was done, and this one was done by is this the one by Sadie? I think it is. No, yes, this is the one. I may have this wrong here. I apologize for that. No, this is not done by Sadie. I have this one wrong. This is not labeled correctly. I apologize. This one was done by Roland Nagy. And the reason I wanted to show you this picture is because it's very, very different than what I think even most of us would photograph. It's much more graphical. Now here he has the horizon line in the middle, which is unusual, which you normally don't do, but because you're trying to draw attention to the tree, which is again what I call what's the hero of the shot, is the tree, it works because now your eye goes right to the center of the image. The way he's gotten the background lit or set up does reinforce that. And so here's just the reason I wanted to show this picture. It's really an example of thinking a little bit differently, not thinking pure photography. I could see this image being used as a stock photo for a magazine or for like iStock photo or something like that. Because it could tell a story. You could put anything you wanted in there, and you could use this image to communicate a lot of different concepts, and that's one reason I think it works. So it's not a traditional image, which I think is unusual, and I like that. I tend, frankly, to be a little more traditional, but I think he did a great job on that, and that's why I wanted to show you that. Just kind of get you thinking a little bit about some things that are a little bit different. Okay, so let's go back to our next question, and that is, can someone explain macro photography to me? Give it a rolling here, and that's from Debbie Count. So this is a great question, and I tell you why it's a great question is because I would have never thought somebody would ask it. In other words, and I say this a lot to people. One of the problems in being a photographer and doing this for so long is you forget not everyone knows the terms, the basics. And so you say, oh, well, macro photography, everybody knows what that is. Just the name alone describes it, but it doesn't. So that's why I think it's a terrific question, Debbie, and I'm glad you asked it. So macro photography, let me go back and explain something. Macro photography is essentially the ability to take images close up of an object. So you want to take a picture of this thumb drive. Okay, then you got to get really close, or you have to zoom in on it. The problem is that every lens, I don't care who it's made by, has a minimum focusing distance. So if you get too close to an object to be able to fill the screen, the lens will hunt or it won't focus. You'll see it'll go back and forth trying to focus and it won't focus. And that's just an optics issue. So you have to back up. So when you back up, that's fine, it'll focus, but then the object is so small in the frame, you don't get a really good close-up image, and so you have to crop it, and therefore that uses up your resolution, and the image is not going to be as sharp. So when they talk about macro photography, you're typically looking for a lens that will focus close enough to give you a 1-to-1 magnification. That means that the image is going to be a full size. It's going to really be the actual size of the image in the viewfinder or on the screen as it is in real life. So if I'm able to get this close to an image, it's going to fill the whole sensor or the whole screen. And that's really typically what you want. So macro photography is the ability to take a picture, an image of something very close up, and get it as large as possible so it fills the sensor. Because if you put it in, again, if you have it really small and you get real close, you can only get 6 feet away, then you're losing half your quality. You want to get as much of that sensor filled up, most of the image to that object to cover that image. So there's different focal lengths of macro lenses. So you can get a 40 millimeter macro, a 60 millimeter macro, 90 millimeter macro, 105 millimeter macro. I think Canon has 100. There's even 180 or a 200 millimeter macro. Now, so why would you need one over the other is really the question. And the question is, what is it you're photographing? If you're photographing flowers and bees and insects and things like butterflies and things like that, you can't get real close, even if the lens will focus within a few inches. You can't get that close because then the subject will fly away, okay? So you want to have a lens that's long enough so you can still get that 1-to-1 magnification, but not so close that the subject's going to fly away. So generally, if you're doing insects and wildlife and flowers and things like that, you typically want a 90 millimeter or longer lens for that kind of macro photography. I believe I think Tamron makes a 90 millimeter macro, Sigma makes a 105 macro, and they make some others, but those are the primes, the fixed focus ones or fixed focal length. Nikon makes a 105, and which I have. I use that mainly, though I don't do macro photography, but I do product photography for my commercial clients. So I will use that to photograph a product and get that full, again, the same kind of thing. I want to fill that screen with that image. And also in doing product photography, I can't get too close because I'm lighting the object. And if I do, as you can see here, you'll get a shadow on the object. And so I need to be able to get back a little bit, but still get that same full 1-to-1 magnification. So that's the reason why you have a longer lens. So it depends on what kind of you're photographing. Typically, the longer the focal length, they're going to be a little more expensive. And the last thing I'll say about macro photography, it is very, very tricky. And the reason is you're so close and the magnification is so much, even if you're shooting at f/22, which is a very, very small aperture, the depth of field is going to be very, very narrow. I mean, within inches. And so it's not uncommon to be able to get, one little piece of something in focus and this far away be out of focus. And I don't mean to go into too much detail here, but there's some software that will let you do focus stacking, and that's a technique that's used. So what happens is you focus in the foreground, and let's say it's a flower or something. You focus on the front of the flower, you take a picture, you focus a little bit further, you take another image, and you keep going, you're changing the focus. And then the software blends those together and gives you this incredible depth of field. And so focus stacking is a technique that's used in macro photography if you're really serious about it. So anyway, that's probably way more information than you wanted to know, but I'd rather you understand what's going on and why this stuff works and why we do these things, not just that just answer the question really, with one answer. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Okay, so Michelle asked a question. This is a really good question, by the way, and I get this a lot. Says, I'm quite new to photography and I want to buy a newer, up-to-date camera. Don't we all? What differences will I see with a new camera, or is it merely to do with the skill of the photographer using the right settings? Well, it's a trick question in a way. Michelle doesn't, I don't think, realize that, but it's a little bit of a trick question because it's both. All right, a new camera will give you some advantages, but a good photographer, photographer with some experience and a talented photographer can take a reasonable picture, a reasonable image, capture a reasonable image with any kind of camera. And I've seen it done many times. My wife's done it to me. She'll hand me her iPhone, say, here, can you take this picture? Because she knows I look differently. I see differently. And so when I compose a picture and take a picture, even with an iPhone, it's going to be different than the one that she or somebody else would do that's not a trained photographer or an experienced photographer. So there are two parts to this, two answers to this question. The first part is it's definitely technique. And you'll hear me say, so I say technique trumps technology every single day. I'd much rather have somebody that understands the technique and the skills to solve a problem and to make an image with whatever tools they have, more so than somebody that's like all into, I got to have the newest camera with gazillion megapixels and all this kind of stuff. That technology does not solve those problems. So now it will certainly help. It'll give you a sharper image, that type of thing. But technique is always the preferred tool to use to take a better picture, better image. And one of the analogies I use, you'll find I'm big on analogies if you haven't figured that out. If I said to you, oh, this is a wonderful meal, and Gordon Ramsay cooked it, and I said, well, what stove does Gordon Ramsay cook on? I want it the same stove. My meals aren't going to taste like Gordon Ramsay's meals just because I use the same equipment. So it's not about the equipment. It's really about the technique. Now, having said that, a newer camera will have some advantages. Now, almost every camera I see that comes out on the market, no matter when it is, there's a lot of other little things they add, but there are two things you can count on in almost every new model of every camera. And if you go back and look and you check this out, you'll see this is true. Every camera that comes out, the two features they tend to improve on, other than all the fancy stuff, are focusing and ISO, or sensitivity, the ability to react to light. And so I think that has to do with the fact that the technology gets a little better. The what they're able to do is put faster processors in these cameras, and therefore they're able to process the image as it comes off the sensor faster, and takes less battery, of course, because that's always a problem. And be able to remove that noise, and also have more focusing points and that kind of stuff, because they have a faster processor, CPU computer inside that camera. So I think now, there'll be other features they'll add to it, video and that, but those are still the same kind of thing. But I think the two things you'll find every single time in almost every camera model are better focusing and better sensitivity, or ISO performance. And of course, now they may bump up the resolution, but there's kind of an interesting thing that's going on. We've leveled off at around 20 to 24 megapixels as being the sweet spot for new cameras. Now there are higher end cameras, of course, 36, 42, 60 megapixel cameras, but that's kind of the norm. That's not the norm. Those are the higher end professional cameras. And those are really oriented toward a specific tool. I mean, like even Phase 1 has a 150 megapixel camera. It's an amazing camera, but it's still not something that you would use every day. So 24 megapixels. Should have turned off my phone here. Sorry. Sorry about that. Turn this off. 24 megapixels is about the sweet spot in there. And so the reason that is because the higher, generally speaking, now not, they've gotten better technology, but generally the higher the resolution, you lose some of the low or the low light capability. So the higher megapixel camera, a 60 megapixel camera, for example, or 40 megapixel camera, typically, again, generally speaking, it's not a rule of thumb. Generally speaking, will not have the sensitivity of a 12 megapixel or a 24 megapixel camera. So the better lower light cameras have lower resolution. And at some point, you don't really need all that resolution anyway, quite frankly. So again, 24, 30 megapixels is pretty much the sweet spot nowadays for everything. So anyway, yes, a newer camera will give you some feature advantages, but your technique will always trump the technology every single time. So, Michelle, I hope that helps and answers your question and gives you some insight. I'm not saying don't get a new camera. We all want new cameras. It's always nice to have new cameras, but do you need a new camera? I will say, without beating this to death, if you don't mind, is I will also I'm also big on learning composition, lighting, and framing. I think that makes more of a difference than a new camera. I've purchased many, many new pieces of equipment, believe me, and then I've looked at my images and go, wow, they're not really any better. Maybe they're sharper, but they're not. They're not. Oh, wow, this has really made a big difference in my photography. And so, having done that numerous times, I've realized that it's really more about the Yahoo here behind the lens is pushing the button more so than the camera I'm using. And so, learning and working on my skills and my lighting and my composition and my conceptual aspect of how I see is really more important than a new camera in many ways. So anyway, hope I don't want to go too much into that. So okay. Let's see here. So Michelle. All right. So now the next question is from Jennifer Moran, and Jennifer asks, "What do you use to send your clients their sessions?" Now, again, this varies. There's lots of options out there: Dropbox, a OneDrive, Microsoft OneDrive, Google Drive, blah blah blah. I can only speak for myself, and that I use a service called Hightail. It used to be called You Send It, I think. Anyway, hightail.com. And the reason it's a paid service, but the reason I use that service and why I gave up on Dropbox and some of these other services is that I want to be able to send my client a link in an email or however, and have them be able to click on that link, go and download those images without having to have an account, without having to have them sign in, without having to get bombarded with ads or any of that kind of stuff. And that was a problem I had with Dropbox, for example. Dropbox, I find, shouldn't say this, I find incredibly annoying. It seems like every time someone shares a folder with me on Dropbox, and I go and I click on it, it says, oh, you don't have enough space in your account to be able to view or share these files. You have to upgrade. Now, maybe it's me. Maybe I don't understand how to use Dropbox. Okay, I'll really admit that. But it's just really annoying, and I don't want my clients to. I'm trying to make this as easy on my clients as possible. Plus, I can upload 25 gig files. I think they're pretty big, and I do some video stuff and things like that. So they're large files. So that's the one I use. It's not a proofing site. So if you're looking for a proofing site where people can go and pick images and such, they can do that on this site. There's things called Spaces, and you can put the images up there and they can click on them and they can leave comments. But that I wouldn't consider it a proofing site. It's really more of a hosting and a downloading site. And that's the way I deliver my images to a client. It may work for you. It may not. I don't know. So, all right, let's see. So the other question we have, oh, this is a good one. Okay. So Rebecca says, I have a Canon T6 and I have a question about back button focus. I'm trying to get sharp images of my cat walking towards me, but then they're still fuzzy. What am I doing wrong? Okay, there's going to be a lot of things going on here, but I will tell you that photographing your cat or your animal is typically the first thing I do with a new camera or lens. I want to see how sharp it is. And so that's the only subject that will be around that will let me not move, or for the most part, you get the occasional look like, oh really, but anyway, so it's really great. So I get a kick out of this question. So, but it is a serious question, and I'll tell you, I'm going to try and demonstrate this the best I can. So what is back button focus anyway? So back button focus, let's see if I can do this now. Okay. So back button focus is where you assign your, So you assign your focus to a button on the rear of the camera. Every camera has a little different, it's a little different place. But on this one, you say it says AF on this is a Nikon D810. AF on, and you have to go into the menu and you have to tell it, this is what I want to use for focus. So instead of using the shutter button, when you push that down and have it focus, you have to push this button down. And when you push this button down, then the camera will focus, just like pushing the front button down. So why in the world would you even want to do that? What's the point, first of all? So I learned using back button focus when I was shooting sports for a living. And the reason is because you're tracking an object of running fast or moving fast. And so therefore you want the camera to always be focusing. So the way it works is that as long as I'm pushing this button down, the camera will focus. I'm going to try and demonstrate this. I'll see if I can do this here. Of course. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this rear button here. You can see the reflection. When I push the button, you'll notice, watch the lens, watch right here. You'll see the lens will focus. See it focusing? And when I move it around, it's constantly focusing. It will always focus if I put my hand in front of it. Okay. See, it's always going to be focusing as long as I have my thumb on this back button. So what happens is here we'll go to this camera here, see if this helps. So if you're tracking an object, and like this, and you want to be focusing, you hold that down, and the camera will will focus continuously. Now, keep in mind, to do that though, you do have to turn on continuous focus. There's two steps. One is a step where you want to have you want to turn on the back button part so that when you push the button, that now becomes the focus. The second part, though, is you want it to be on continuous focus, meaning as long as you have that button pushed, it will continue to focus. Now, it works the opposite of typically what's called single focus. So with single focus, when you push the button on the front of the camera, the shutter button, it will lock focus and stay locked, and then you can recompose and take the picture. On this mode, in back button focus continuous, it's the opposite. As long as you have that button pushed, it's always focusing. So on the Nikon, again, it's a little different. On every camera, it's a little different. On the Nikon, I don't know if you guys can see this or not here. I apologize. Let's see if I push this button here on the side, if I can find it with my thumb. Okay, here it is. So if I push this button right here, you guys probably can't see that. But right here it says AF-C. And if I rotate the rear dial, it now, again, I'm sure you can't read that. It says AF-S. Take my word for it. And so I can go back again, AF-C. So AF-C means as long as I have this button pushed, it's going to focus. AF-S means when I push it, it focuses and it locks. Okay. And then when I let up, it's not going to focus again. Well, actually, that's the same way it works on the continuous focus, to be honest with you. So on the continuous focus, I'll show you again. So on it's gonna focus as long as I have my finger on the button. I let up, and now no matter what happens, it's not going to focus. Now, so the question is, why would you use this, and where would you use this? I actually use this on everything I shoot now. I'm so used to doing it that it becomes automatic. The first thing I do when I pick up a camera is I grab that back button and I hit that button to see if to focus. So I've only had one person I've taught this to that didn't like it and went back to using just the shutter button on the front. It takes a little bit to getting used to, I admit, but here's why I like it. Because I can select exactly where I want that focus point to be. So what happens is I use single point focus, I use back button focus, and I use continuous. And so what I'll do is I'll put this on even if I'm doing a portrait, I'll focus on the person's eye, put that on there, push the rear button, focus, let up. And now when I recompose, as long as I don't as long as I don't push that button on the back again, that focus is locked right there on that eye, even though I may recompose the frame a little bit. And so I know that my focus point is going to be exactly where I set it. The problem I see a lot of people have is when they have this on without using that mode, they'll sometimes focus and then let up and recompose, and then when they push again, the camera reacquires focus again. Whoops, sorry, hitting the microphone there. Reacquires focus again. So what happens is it focuses on the background or some other object and not where you want it to. So this way, by using back button focus, number one, it's continuous. Number two, it's only going to be focusing when I have my thumb on the button, and when I let up, it's going to stop focusing no matter where the camera's aimed, and therefore I have a better idea of the focus point and where that's going to be. So hopefully that helps. Again, it's a little awkward, I admit, and you can try it, because it's a little unusual from what we're used to doing. Where you have the shutter, normally the shutter button is set up for focus, but I think you'd find if you try it, and again, if you're doing, kids sports or anything that's moving or anything like that, it's great, because now as you're moving the camera, it's always tracking the object. So anyway, so hopefully, Rebecca, that answered your question about back button focus. Why possibly it's not working in your exact situation? You may have back button focus on, but you may not have continuous turn on. That's the other thing. On the, I'm not a Canon shooter, but on the Canon, I believe it's called AI focus, servo focus, I think is what it is. And so you would tell it the servo focus to be continuous, or whatever the term is they use for that. So that as long as you have that button pushed, it will always continuously focus. So just got to remember, let up your finger when you've acquired the focus point you want, because otherwise it will keep focusing. And I've seen that happen before as well. Okay. Let's see what else. So we also have a few more minutes here. The other question. Oh, I wanted to show you this one other kind of critique here. This is a cute picture, I think. And there's a reason I want to show you this one. All right. So this is a picture. It was done. This is the one I was saying before. I think that was done by Sadie. I hope, Sadie, I got this right. Yeah, pretty sure. It's a D7500 50 millimeter 1.8 lens, again, a 15th of a second, which is pretty good for 15th of a second. It's hard to, and ISO 125 at an f2. So here's why I wanted to show you this picture. Now, is this like some amazing, wonderful art, photo of art? No, it's a wonderful picture though. But there's some things about this picture that I think are worth pointing out from a learning standpoint. And it's not, again, no disregard or no, I'm not trying to say it's not a great picture, but it's just, what really works about this picture is a couple of things. First of all, it's all about emotion. You can look at this picture, and I think any animal lover, and especially dog lover, cannot help but recognize that look. Okay? It just, you can say the dog looks sad, you can say the dog looks whatever, but there's certainly an emotion there. It's looking to the owner or whatever's going off frame, and there's something there. And so that really tugs at your heart. And, it's not super sharp. I can see it's a little soft, probably because it was shot at 15th of a second. But the emotion works. And that's why I wanted to show this image. The depth of field is kind of nice. And what it does do, though, is it also draws your attention to the most important thing in the frame. And this is something I harp on over and over again with people. And I describe it as the hero. What's the hero of the shot? What is the most important thing in the frame? Because our job as photographers is to draw the viewer's attention. Where do you want the viewer to look? Consider it, you're drawing a picture. and you wanted to have an object, and you wanted the person to look at that one object. What is that in the frame of a photograph? Photography is all about eliminating, not adding. If it doesn't belong there, if it doesn't contribute to the story, get rid of it. Crop, move, whatever, change your position of your camera, zoom in, zoom out. Get rid of anything that's not there to help tell the story. And why this picture, I think, works, even though technically it's got a couple little, flaws, what makes it work is the emotion. It's definitely emotion. I am drawn directly to the dog's eyes. I know exactly what's going on there. There's nothing about it, nothing else in the background, not a bowl or anything back there on the right that's distract me. It could, I could give some critique or some creative criticism on constructive criticism on things you could do to improve the picture, but that's not the point of why I'm showing you Sadie's picture here. The reason I'm showing you Sadie's picture is because it works, because it's emotional, and that will always be more important than technique, or, well, I say not more than technique. It will be more important than technology or anything like that. There's I don't have it in front of me, but there's a great saying that I enjoy by Ansel Adams. If you don't know who Ansel Adams is, if you're a new photographer, he's like, was a well-known and probably one of the most famous landscape photographers, who did a lot of work for the Park Service. But one of his quotes was something about, and I'm going to mess this up, but I think you'll get the point. A sharp photo of a fuzzy concept is not any good. In other words, you can have a great concept, but a super sharp picture, but if it doesn't work from a conceptual standpoint, if the viewer's looking around going, what's the point of this picture? Then so what? It doesn't really do any good. And so the thing I love about this picture, again, Sadie, is that you really done a great job of capturing emotion. I'm drawn immediately to the dog's face. It makes me want to know more about the photo. What's the dog thinking about? What's he see there? And so that's why I wanted to select this picture and show it to you tonight, because I think it's a great learning tool. Always look for the emotion. Always try and figure out what's the most important thing in the frame. If it's not, doesn't contribute to the story, doesn't help tell that story, then eliminate it. I like to tell people to focus on the background. Okay. I do a lot of magazine photography, work for magazines. And so I'll often be sometimes I'm given a story. So here's a story. It's already written. Here's what we're going to be doing. And sometimes they haven't written the story yet. So I'll try and ask, what's the point? What's the person I'm photographing? What's the story? What's the concept? What are they doing? Because I want to put that subject in context. I want to use the surroundings to help tell that story and to reinforce that. So just by looking at the photograph, I immediately can tell something about that person, about the article, whatever it may be. And so that would be my suggestion to you, is to start looking at more storytelling, where you want to draw the viewer's attention, and also about that background. How can you use that background to subliminally help tell that story? Anyway, I probably beat that to death there. I apologize, but it is very, very important. I mean, you look at any of the quote unquote work from the masters, and a lot of it's not technically that great. I mean, some of it's soft, some of it's out of focus, shot with film, whatever. But the emotion, the image and what it's coming across in that still image is really what's the most important part. Anyway, I will finish on that. I think that's it for tonight. I think we got hit all the questions. And again, I want to remind you that if you want to ask questions later on, or that we can do them next week or whatever, or even if you just have a question that comes up during the week, and I'll either answer directly, or I will use it on the next week's show. You can send it to help@photomentor.tv. If you want to learn more about what Photo Mentor is all about and what we're trying to do, we're going to be launching some educational services here in the next, hopefully, few weeks. I've been working on. You can go to photomentor.tv. There's a simple form there with your name and email. and then I will let you know as soon as we have more information. But even if you don't care about any of that kind of stuff and you just want to help get some information, again, every Friday we're here at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And I guess if you're in other parts of the country or world, I believe that is considered 1 o'clock or 1 a.m. 0100 hours UTC, Universal Coordinated Time. So anyway, again, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your time. Hopefully you've gotten something out of this. And again, if you like what we're doing here, go over to on our Facebook page, which is Facebook, of course, .com. Let's see, it's photomentor.tv is the page. We appreciate if you'd like it and give us a like and any comment that you have on what we're doing. And I guess that is probably, I think, about it. So, again, see ya.